Good morning, everyone. Welcome to my session on when low-code solutions are too smart or too dumb and high-code solutions are too clever. First of all, thanks to all of our sponsors to make sure that we can actually do the conference, and thank you all for actually being here on the second day. My name's Robert. I'm husband to my great wife and kids. That's the most important thing because they allow me to actually be here and make sure everything gets sorted while I'm away. I'm also a certified trainer and I'm a developer at Wortel, which is a Dutch MSP. This session is going to be about a challenge. What many companies might have is we need to have our engineers get grip on our Azure alerts. That means they get the alerts, everything's fine. However, we'd like to have more details and maybe some remediation done, whatever we can do to make it easier on our engineers to get sorted with everything concerning Azure Monitor alerts. So, when we're starting looking for possible solutions, we can look at low-code options such as Logic Apps or Power Apps. However, they've got some pros and cons, and we're going to go through them and see why they might or might not be a possible solution. So, first off, the pros for Logic Apps is it's visual. It's easy to understand, easy to see. Everybody can kind of see what's going on. However, that comes with a downside as well. You have pre-made blocks and you can't really deviate from the pre-made blocks. So there's a lot of those pre-made blocks called connectors. I'm going to show you just now as well. And they have all the built-in logic and retry and whatever. But if you want to do anything off script, you're very limited out of the box. So for people not familiar with Logic Apps, I'll quickly show you. Here I've got a Logic app. Oh, yeah, that's the one. I need this. It's a very simple one. It receives a trigger. I do something with it. I get information, but this block of JavaScript code, that's limited to 1024 characters. So whenever I want to do anything more than that, that's it. I'm stuck. But basically, the whole advantage of this is if I do... Yep. It's stupid. If I run this, it talks and it replies back, I'm stupid. And if I do something else, what you get is in the history, you can actually see a visual track of what happened. This one checks if whatever it gets sent through contains stupid. Oh, then it's right. And if I go back, the second request didn't contain stupid, so it does something else. So, of course, you can do whatever logic you want here, but the main thing is, for engineers who actually have to troubleshoot what's going on, it's very easy, it's very visual to find out what's going on, where something went wrong. In case they need to troubleshoot, it works. However, it's a limited solution. So, if we go back. If we then look at the alternative, high-code solutions, such as Azure Functions, you have a different set of pros and cons. It's very flexible. You can basically do whatever you want with it. It's multiple languages supported, and it's very optimized for microservices. So you can have solution A connected to B, blah, 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 and they all talk to each other. However, the con is you need developer skills to actually make it, maintain it, troubleshoot it. And another thing is the orchestration. You can't easily see the link between all functions and solutions. So, but before I show something, the advantage is what you have is Logic Apps. You need to make it in the designer, and you can't really test it locally. On the other hand, Azure Functions, you can test locally before you actually start deploying it. So for the person developing it, it has some advantages, but for the one using and troubleshooting it, there's a lot of downsides. So what I have is, I'll clean this up. Here, I will start my function app locally. So here you can see it's waiting for info, and here I'm gonna provide some demo alerts, so actual alerts which I've captured from Azure Monitor, and I'm gonna have the function app provide me some more information. You can see at the back, you can see, oh, I received the trigger, I received the information, I'm processing it, and here you can see I'm getting actual results. So in this case, the only thing my function app currently does is it gets the alert and it looks at what type of alert it is. So it categorizes it, and it gets me resource information. So it gets a resource ID and splits it up into basic subscription ID, resource group, resource, which is all simple. Again, you can do more complex, but I'm going to use the same solution later on with something else. So this works just fine, gives me the information I need. And if you look at the online version, so you have your Azure function, and you see the functions, and there's not much to see as in what it does, what happens. I can enable the logs, which you should always do whenever you do any of these solutions. Make sure you set up application insights, otherwise you can't track anything down. And if I now do test live, I'm going to do the same thing against the live solution. And you see here, there we go. All the information is processed, provided back. But if I want to connect something to another function app, I can't really see what happens with it. So for a developer perspective, perfect, fine. It's fast. It can do whatever you do, but I'm not doing this for me. The problem is, as with a lot of things, I'm not making tools for myself. I'm making tools for somebody else, and I provide them a hammer, and they're supposed to use it. And that means that if you have problems with your nails, don't call me. You should know what to do. So while high code is ideal for developers, users, not so much. So AI thought this looked kind of like me. So we're trying to find the sort of Goldilocks solution. The first one's too simple, or it's too cold, too hot. The second one, too complex. What's the sweet spot to get this working? That's actually back to Logic Apps. However, this time we're using it with PowerShell code. And that means we have to choose a different SKU once we start doing Logic Apps. And instead of using the default consumption, we go to the standard plan. And in the background, you also need an app service plan, which should sound somewhat familiar, which is what you need when you do Azure Functions. Basically, if you look at the background, it's really a combination of both things. You get dedicated CPU and processing power, and you get the functionality of Logic Apps designing. Let me just quickly show you what that looks like. Where's my mouse? There we go. If I now have a new Logic app with standard SKU, I get the option to make multiple workflows. So instead of having a consumption Logic app, which has one workflow attached to it, I can now, because I'm having dedicated CPU, I can have multiple workflows which do whatever I need for it. If I look at the option of one of the workflows, it's going to be similar to what I had before with the Logic app. However, now I have an option to execute PowerShell scripts, which is kind of best of both worlds again. I can do all the complex logic, but with the visual design. What does that look like? For example, here I just receive information and then I just repeat back saying, hello PSConf. So it does what it needs to do. If you look back at the slide deck, and I'll go through the options just now, you said you have default output and input data if you start using PowerShell scripts. And I'm focusing mainly on primarily output data because, as you just saw, I don't need to get anything to use PowerShell scripts. The main thing is my script does something and it provides data back. In order to do that, you use a predefined function called push workflow output. That basically takes whatever you do in your script or whatever message you want to output and pushes it back to the workflow to be consumed by a next action. However, you can also get data from previous actions or triggers. In case you're not too familiar, in Logic Apps, there's only one trigger. What triggers it? It can be like an HTTP request, a schedule, whatever can be the trigger defined, but there can be only one per workflow. So you can have one trigger output and all the actions you put in between, you can get the action output from there. If you get that data, it has these properties within it. And this is going to be the important bit because I'll show you just now in the code how it works. However, you need to know what the data kind of looked like coming in and where the data resides. It has some common properties, but the main thing you're going to end up focusing on is going to be the outputs property. But as you can see, the type there is a J token. So it's kind of, they converted from JSON, but it's not really nicely done. And why that's important is this. If I need to get sub-properties, and I'll show you just now the example, but I need to explain it first. The sub-properties, so for example, if I have body.message. Whatever value this, the body and the message, that's an object, and I can get those back. But the final one, the value which I want to get back, that's going to be a Newton JSON format. So it doesn't properly convert to string by itself. So if you do what you do with PowerShell normally and you try and get the end value, it's going to parse completely wrong. It's not going to give you anything you can work with. So you always need to use toString at the end. Trust me, that's going to be something you're going to run into. That's something you just need to troubleshoot at the point, because you need to know where your data lies. Now, since this is conceptual, I'll show you what I mean. Oh, wait, I'll do it demo-wise first. Here, I'm going to show you the workflow, and I'll show you. I have a different workflow called trigger and action. As I mentioned, here you have the box at the top. This is the trigger. So when an HTTP request is received, it doesn't matter what I name it. So in here, I can rename it. But since it's the only trigger, I can keep referring to it to get trigger output. However, this is an action. So in my code, here I can use get trigger output, but get action output, I need to define which action do I need to get the output from. And since this action is only outputting a string, I need to get, again, the action object. The data which it outputs is always going to be under the outputs property, subproperty, and I need to immediately convert it to string. Should my data have subproperties, then you need to exactly figure out once where it starts going from an object to a string or something else or a Boolean, whatever. But that's when you need to start checking when I need to convert. But here you can see I'm grabbing part of the trigger info, so what I'm posting to the information, part I'm using from the action, and together I'm combining it to see what the output is. And here you can see I'm pushing the output back, and I'm just taking that as a response. What this does is, like I said, by default, the script has PSConfEU 2025, and the action is awesome. But I can do this. Jakub. And it does the same. So you can see it live captures data, it adds it together, and then from there on, it's basically, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to do with the logic? If you start working on this in the editor, what you see here is you simply have the option to add an action. Oh, type. And you see the built-in option, execute PowerShell script code. And this basically, you can have a one-liner, you can have a full 200-300 line script, doesn't matter. Here you provide a name for your script, and this is again what you can then use to reference. I'm going to also show you just now where you can find this all and how you can troubleshoot this. So, yeah, I'm going to do that now quickly. If you're in your Logic app, here you can see all your workflows, which you have defined. But if you scroll down, you will have something called development tools and advanced tools. And for people familiar with function apps, this is exactly the same as function apps work. You open this, click on Go, and you get the Kudu environment, the Kudu services. Let me just... And here, if you click on Debug Console and PowerShell, because of course we want PowerShell, you can see the whole back-end folder structure. And if you go to Site and www.root, you can see all your workflows defined. So in this case, I have my script. I do cat. You can see the exact script which you have. And similarly, you can see the entire workflow in code base. Now, this is all fine. This is all very simple, but most probably you want to do something a little bit more advanced. So you want to have interaction with different services, maybe even use modules. You want to interact with, for instance, Azure resources directly because you get an Azure Monitor alert. You maybe want to do remediation or provide more information. So by default, you're able to actually use public modules from the PS gallery. What you need to do is in the host.json, that's one folder up, I'll show you just now. Default, that's turned on. You need the option manage dependency to be set to enabled. But like I said, by default, that's already done. And then in the underlying requirements.psd1, you need to define which modules do you want to use and which version, and it will get them from the PS gallery for you. But should you want private modules, you need to upload. First, you need to create a folder called modules, and you can simply save your module locally, upload it here, and then it works. So in that sense, it's very flexible in what you want to do with your PowerShell code. So as I mentioned, here you can see this is the host and the requirements. So that's in the www root. And this applies to all the workflow definitions. So if workflow 1 doesn't need a module, but workflow 2 does, just put it in here and it applies for all workflows. So if I do here, you can see manage dependency, that's by default on. And here you can see, oh, in this case, I have AZ accounts, AZ compute, and AZ resources enabled. Do note that while the default has, like it says, AZ star, you do want to optimize this. And what you, once you actually put modules in here, what you need to do is you go back to your main Logic app, restart the Logic app, and wait. Unfortunately, the first time, it just takes time. So you want to do this ideally, of course, before you go into production. But you need to have a workflow definition. So, and you can't just have the Logic app without the workflows. You need to have one definition created, and that one has, let me do the simple one first. That one needs to actually have something in the workflow. If you don't do that, it's simply not going to go like, oh, I need to do something. I need to load something. So even though you're doing everything correct, you need to save one, and then in the background, it starts populating all the files and all the modules. If you look in the Kudu environment, it stores all the data in data managed dependencies. And here you can see all the modules which have been downloaded. So once you restart your Logic app, once you've defined everything, and you look in here, you will slowly start populating all the modules. One thing I've noticed, I don't know if it was a bug or not, when I had simply the AZ module with all the dependencies, it first downloaded everything, and then it removed all the sub dependencies. So, personal experience, define exactly which submodules you need. Define them in the requirements.psd1. So, now you have modules working, and now you want to interact with resources. You can set up on your Logic app managed identity or define a user managed identity, and then you provide role access to whatever it needs to do. That does mean that in your script where you access this, you need to define connect AZ account identity. And then you don't need credentials. It does whatever it does under its managed identity, and it goes ahead. Now, you've defined your workflow. You define your script, and you're still trying to figure out something doesn't really go wrong or doesn't go right. With a function app, you can do that locally. Unfortunately, with Logic apps, you cannot. So you're dependent on application insights. By default, if you do a script, let me see. Here I've got it. It says you can use write host, write output, or write debug, so it will come up in the logs. Now, over here, I've tried all three. So I should be able to find back in my logs over the last 30 minutes. This is the full log. You go in, for the people not familiar with application insights, you just go to the logs and you can do either a predefined functions or you can do actual KQL code. So you can do simple mode or KQL. And now I'm just doing all operations which run a PowerShell script. I'm looking back, and here I see my output, my write host, and my write output, but not my write debug. So even though the message says use write debug, don't use write debug because it simply doesn't show up. Ideally, you want to have something like this. Something which has output or information, where information is write host and output is write output. And you can see whatever you've put in. It's like the write verbose in your scripts. Now, so this is how you troubleshoot where things go right or wrong and to see what's going on. So make sure this is the trace you wanna, or the KQL query you wanna use to troubleshoot. Now, I wanna tie everything together with the original question. I wanna get more grip on my Azure alerts. I now know that Logic Apps with PowerShell has more functionality, and I know some pieces and things, but now I wanna show you what you can actually do with it. And that's I'm going to save it, and I'm going to run you through what it does, because this takes a while to actually run, because this is a whole simple demo, Then we had the trigger and the action. But what I actually want to show, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit, is I get a full alert. I get the alert info, similarly to what my function app did. I get the resource information, I get the alert type based on if it's CPU alert, disk alert, memory alert, whatever. And if I can process the alert correctly, then I've parsed it correctly, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do VM remediation. And currently it's a long script, but basically it looks at what type of alert came in, and I'm going to invoke AZ run command on that machine. I'm going to see if the machine has a power state that's up. If it's a CPU alert, I want to get the top CPU or top process alerts. If it's a disk alert, I'm going to get disk information, etc. It's going to check if it's a Windows or Linux machine and going to send a separate request based on whatever it is. And then if that goes well, it's going to send it back. And if it doesn't work, it says, well, I found the information, but I was unable to run the actual remediation, but it's still going to provide me the information back. And again, you can make this as big and small as you want, but let me see. That's currently still running. So if you want to see how that goes, in your workflow, you have run history, and you can see one is done and the other is running. So it's doing this on actual live VMs at the moment. So that's why it's taking a little bit. And it should normally take about 2 to 3 minutes. I'll just take you through one of the results quickly. So here it says, I received, wait, this is the schema, but this is all the information it parsed. And then from the alert info, it says, oh, it's a disk alert, and the resource is a Linux VM, and it's located here. So that's all going fine. And it's trying to do remediation, and the output says, well, I was successful at running it. And let me see if I have it here. This is an easy way to show it. So here you can see it did the processing, but I'm more interested in the remediation. So here you can see I ran 2 commands on the machine. One being give me the host name, and the second one, give me disk info. And if I look at the same one, but on my other machine, it's running get process on a Windows machine, and it's giving me the data. And basically, you can do whatever you want here, and whatever you can think about, and you can have the Logic app execute it for you. So, as a result, this is, for me, the perfect Goldilocks solution where I have the visual representation so that end users can troubleshoot if need be, and they can see exactly which process went well or which didn't. And I have the complexity of my function apps. And I can do whatever I can think of. And that's my session. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
A couple of questions, actually. When you started with the basic logic apps, you said you have a limit of 1,024 characters. I know it's a hack, but is that for the entire logic app, or is it that really each step? Could you, in principle, chain a number of smaller functions in order to get more functionality.
Okay, so the question is, in a consumption logic app, you have the limit of 1024 characters for each script step. Can you chain the script steps? You might be able to do. I personally didn't try because I initially had a problem that needed more than 1024 characters, even when I used shortened code. The other downside is it's JavaScript only. So, of course, you can have in a consumption-based logic app, call an Azure automation runbook. You can have it call a function app. You can have it go externally. However, that means for your troubleshooting, you need to go to a separate system and go back and figure out how it went. So you have the same problem again, that if you do a hacky solution, your end users are going to have to figure out why you're doing that. So it's possible. It's not ideal. Yeah. Yep.
You said you don't get output from debug, but my impression is that in order to get output from debug, you have to run it with the dash debug
switch.
Just as you do that run dash verbose, for instance.
Yeah.
You don't get the debug output. You maybe run it with the dash debug.
Okay. So on the question is, normally with write debug, similarly to write verbose, you have to run the script with a dash verbose or dash debug. And since I'm not running that, is that maybe the cause? I have to double check because I know with some solutions, let me go to the workflow. Normally you'd have an option with, I know with automation runbooks, to tick verbosity or debug. I don't have the option here, so I don't know how they implemented this, but
in the console, if you run the script, can you do the dash debug?
When in the script, you mean? Which?
When you demonstrated, when you ran it, yeah.
Oh, so on the console. Okay. Okay, so the question is if I can run it from the console, can I use the can I use a dash debug? However, my console can run that script, but the script is dependent on the workflow. So it doesn't work like that. I would have to enable it somewhere in the workflow, only I don't have an option to enable it in the workflow. So anyone else? The one behind, yeah, that one was first. Oh.
If you need to trigger debug there, you need to define so the input actually can take the debug parameter in and set the debug reference to continue, so silently continue. So the context is actually showing the debug information, but writing debug.
Okay, so if I'm not mistaken, I'd have to, if I get it correctly, I would have to take input and to state my debug preference. But that's, it doesn't sound logical. It's like all the implementations I've seen, it's simply a switch or simply where you can force it to be debuggable or diagnostics. It's not, the implementation is really, really buggy in that sense. So for now, I would suggest using write host or write output and tracking it in the logs.
I have another question regarding that as well, the debug, because I'm struggling with it here as well.
Mm-hmm.
in some cases. And I'm trying to figure out a way how to enter the context of the logic app or function app to actually set the debug preference in the context, the running context of the logic app, instead of actually changing the environmental variables or changing the script and restarting the service.
Okay, so the question is, how can you get into the function context to set the debug preference or any other preference without changing the environment variables? I wouldn't know the answer, to be honest. It might be hacky, but I'm using write host and output to simply what I would normally do under write verbose, simply to see where it's going right or wrong. I would have to look into that. So maybe hit me up later on. Maybe 2 more questions. Yes.
So, in terms of the whole Goldilocks, where would you see kind of pure play Azure automation runbooks as opposed to kind of function apps or logic apps?
Okay, so in terms of Goldilocks, how would I see this solution versus function apps and runbooks and something like this? In this scenario, where I'm making a tool for somebody else to use, this for me is perfect because it's visual. I can have the users go through and they can track in the history, because what we normally do is at the end we have more actions and it sends it to another system or sends it to Teams, and I have time tracking. So they can see exactly in the history which run was what. And they can track what happened. Did it run remediation? Did it do this? Did it... For them, the visual part is the most appealing thing, which makes it so that I have more time to do fun things and they have more time to do their job, and they can focus on exactly what they need. Because if they need information to do their work properly, I can build a script that provides more information. Like here, it doesn't actually remediate something, it just gives more information, but you could have it do both. So for me, in this case, this is the Goldilocks solution. For your case, it might be different. Last question. Yes.
Can you combine it with some sort of code repository? The PowerShell blocks, can you have that in a repository so you don't have to code directly in Logic Apps?
Okay, so the question is, can you put the code that you're using in a repository so you can easily version control and things like that? Unfortunately, no. You can have it locally, but this in the Kudu environment, this is basically where they have to be located. If it's... Yeah, but you still have to upload them. You still have to have that step where you upload it. So you can't have it... I know that with automation runbooks, you can have it connected to Git. So if you version update, it automatically updates, but it doesn't have it like that. So due to time as well, if anybody has any other questions, hit me up later on, and thank you very much.